today, and we have so many amazing topics. We're going to be talking about Enneagram. We're going to be talking about your inner critic and how to work with your inner critic. If you have not heard of working with your inner critic before, this could be a thing that really changes how you exist within your creativity. So highly recommend listening to this episode with our guest, our amazing guest, Maryam Marzara. Maryam has over a decade of experience in leadership development and has supported and made an impact on the lives of people at companies such as Apple, NBCUniversal, the Walt Disney Company, and around the world in countries such as Korea, Singapore, Canada, the UK, China, India, Costa Rica, France, and the United States. She holds a Master's of Science in Organization Development from Pepperdine University's Graziadio School of Business and is a certified coach and a graduate of the Co-Active Coach Training and Certification Program and holds the Certified Professional Co-Active Coach designation, one of the most highly respected and sought-after certifications in the coaching industry and accredited by the International Coach Federation. Maryam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Paige. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here too. You're kind of a big deal. And I really want to introduce any listeners to kind of your story. Tell us how you built such an incredible career over these last years.
Well, thank you. I'm truly honored to be on your podcast. I mean, talk about giving back to the community, talk about being a leader. I would say my journey has been quite, how would you say, exciting, thrilling. Steve Jobs had a quote that said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust in your gut, your intuition, that it's going to lead you somewhere. So when I look back on my dots and connecting them. I've been involved with the concept of leadership in one way or another. Whether I was at the former CIA director and former chief of staff of the president of the United States House, Leon Panetta's Public Policy Institute for Emerging Leaders.
Amazing.
Mouthful. Or I was a class president of my high school or the vice president of my undergraduate campus. I myself have been in some sort of capacity of leadership serving constituents. And then I've, like many of us, have also been on the receiving end of other leaders as well. And this concept of leadership and helping people be the best versions of themselves really stuck to me. And I wove that throughout my journey. How can I help people be the very best versions of themselves? And that's how I would boil it really down.
That's amazing. So you've been a leader your whole life.
It's funny that you say that, because if you were to get my mom on this podcast, she would tell you that in elementary school, when she would pick me up, she could overhear me tell the other kids on campus, mind you, again, let me paint the picture. It is elementary school. And I'm telling everyone, as she recalls and tells me, and I have a little cringe face as she says this, she says, I was telling all the other students, you're not the boss of me. My mom is the boss of me. So somehow I had this concept of leadership early on, and I regarded my mom as that leader. I would definitely say somehow woven in, my passion for leadership has been woven in throughout my journey. Yeah.
Okay, so I already see a thread that I want to pull here a little bit. I know. So when we talked before the podcast, I was like, let's start by talking about Enneagram. But like, there is something that you're already honing in on that I think is so important that I want to draw a line under for everybody, because you kind of said it in two different ways. The connecting the dots, right? Looking backwards and connecting the dots forward. That is such a hard thing to do as a creative, because you can't always see the path in front of you. So you really got to trust something inside of yourself. And it sounds like from a very young age, you had that deep trust and faith in yourself to be able to create a path or walk forward on a path, even if you couldn't see it. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, if we wait for the perfect time, the most perfect occasion to leap into something that is a bigger calling to us, we will never make that leap. So we need to be able to have a deep yearning and honestly, I would say the ability to listen intently with a curiosity to what that yearning is telling us. I think society does a really good job of having us tune out our own innermost leader
Mm-hmm.
and think of all the other reasons why something won't work, why something won't happen, why we won't be successful. And society does not teach us how to quiet those inner critics and how to access the inner wisdom that we all innately have
Mm-hmm.
that has been overridden from other experiences in life. And that's what brings me to where I'm at today. And I want, again, I think I've said this to you previous to recording this podcast, and whether we were doing a photo shoot for my own business, but at the end of the day, I just want to help you, whoever's listening to this podcast, be the very best version of themselves. Notice that I say of themselves and not someone else, right? Authenticity really is a deep value of mine, and it should not be a scapegoat, right? We should never fall on or die on the hill, if you will, of saying, well, that's just the way I am.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. The making the leap part of it, I also think something that is interesting to kind of come to terms with as a creative or somebody who wants to be a leader is that there's nobody that comes along and points at you and says, you're going to lead, get up here on stage. That doesn't happen. What happens is we hear ourselves first. We put ourselves as the authority. We put ourselves as our first leader and follow that, trust that. And that is hard. Like, what do you say to people who have a doubt about that or are maybe waiting for somebody to come along and pluck them out of an audience and say, you need to get up on stage?
I would say welcome, because none of us are immune to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say spend time alone. Be comfortable with spending time with yourself. Get to know yourself. Get to know your narrative. Do what I call a root cause analysis and ask yourself, in that last interaction with my friend, I felt my body temperature rising. Why? Well, I felt my body temperature rising because I completely disagreed with what she said. Why did I completely disagree with what she said? Well, because of this value and that value.
Mm-hmm.
Spend time alone. Get intimately aware with your own narrative, your own story. Hold deep compassion for yourself, because we are not going to shame our way into change.
Gosh. Wait, let me underline that. We are not going to shame our way into change. We are not going to shame ourselves into change. That's major.
Not ourselves, not one another, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly not the world. I think
Mm-hmm.
the world needs sound leadership more than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's even a % of shame in what we're talking about with one another, you're already not going to be successful. We already
True.
have enough shame that we put on ourselves. We don't need to add it.
True. That's so good. I love that. How do we identify an emotion as shame? Because I feel like shame can take so many, like it can put so many costumes on within our own minds that we don't even fully catch it sometimes.
Yeah, I'm smiling because you're really hitting the nail on the head here. One dead giveaway. And it's not, listen, folks, this is not a zero-sum game. Getting to know ourselves, we're human beings. We're more complex than any sort of assessment out there. Side note, yes, I do do coaching through Enneagram, and that is one assessment, and it is not the only way to get to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So in that spirit, understanding the way you speak to yourself. If you hear yourself saying the word should, I should have, that is a clear indicator it's an invitation, I would say, for you to explore where the intent of this statement is coming from. Again, I don't want to say to anyone out there, well, if, I hear the word should, then that's automatic shame. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's an invitation for you to reflect and consider. Most times when I hear the word should, even with myself, I'm like, oh, I'm going down my shame spiral.
Mm. I love that. I love that because it's so something you can immediately do and recognize. And it's simple and it's beautiful and it works. I love that. Can we tie this into the inner critic? What even is the inner critic? How many shapes, how many costumes does an inner critic put on?
So on my website, you will see I keep referring to the inner critic with the S and parentheses because most often clients
Mm.
think that we only have one inner critic. But the more time you spend with yourself and get to know yourself on that intimate level that I was sharing, you start realizing, wait a second, not one person do I know in this world has only one inner critic.
Mm.
So, what is the inner critic? Some may call it the saboteur, which comes from the word sabotage, because at the end of the day, the inner critic is this concept, is this voice, it's this persona, it's a member of your internal board of directors that holds you from your ankles and
Mhm.
keeps you from stepping into what your true calling, this true yearning, this next chapter of your life that you want to step into. And I I have to be really clear. There's a lot of opinions out there that say, shame on the inner critic. The inner critic is bad. Listen, the inner critic has served a purpose. It has been in your life and has gotten you to this point because it has somehow served you.
Mm. Oh my gosh. Wait, can we go deeper into that? Because the truth of it is startling and a little bit disconcerting because it's so true.
We have an almond-shaped part in our brain called the amygdala.
Mhm.
The amygdala is there to protect us. It is there for fight or flight. Now, the amygdala does not understand if something is physical danger or emotional danger. It just alerts you. And when it alerts you, most often is when the saboteur comes in, that inner critic comes in and says, you know what, Maryam? Who do you think you are? How are you gonna do this? What resources have you thought this through? Oh, what is everyone gonna say about this?
Mhm.
Are you confident enough for this? You weren't that confident about X, Y, and Z in the past, right? It's the judger.
Mhm.
I I hear her frequently. And the other thing I want to myth bust right out of the gate right now is you can't myth bust them completely. It is a daily practice. Life throws
Mm.
curves ball at us, and just because something happened one day doesn't mean it's going to be completely go away. It may show up in a different way. Now, the more intimate you become with the inner critics, the better you can thank them. And this
Mhm.
in this guide that I actually have on my website that everyone can get access to, the better you can name them, befriend them, thank them, and
Mhm.
replace them.
Replacing them. That's the task. Like I spent years doing better and better in my business because in my head, I was constantly telling myself, like, that's not good enough. That photo's not good enough. Put out something better. Do this differently. Right. And learning from those things is not necessarily bad. But the way I was speaking to myself was so harsh. And it was a push, 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 do better, do more, do better, do more, do better, do more, be better, be more, be better, be more. And that didn't lead to anything ultimately helpful. It led to a lot of burnout. And this year, I'm in a different place. We kind of were talking about how this year my business looks different than I thought it was, but I'm so happy with that because my business is more robust this year, and it's a really amazing clients. Like I never even thought I would get to dream to work with. But the only reason that ever happened is because I took my foot off the gas of my inner critic, and I certainly let some stuff just be what it was. And I share it from a point of like, I did this, I made this, this is good, let's get this out there, versus how can I continue to perfect? It's not good enough, I'm not going to put it up. Right? Taking my foot off.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
100%. And I think what I appreciate about what you're sharing, Paige, is you're humanizing this.
Mm.
The SVPs that I support, some of the executives that are my clients, we all put on pants the same way,
Mhm.
meaning they're not free of inner critics either. In fact, I would argue that the higher up you go, the more inner critics come out of the woodworks,
Yeah.
right? And I just really deeply appreciate how you're humanizing this because none of us are free from it.
It's true. Let me be so human for you. I will be so human for you guys on this podcast. I think that one of the major reasons I wanted to start this podcast is I was like, it's just such a human, you have to be such a human to be creative, right? There's nothing anything you really want to make in the world, anything you really want to build, it doesn't come from a perfect place or a place of perfection, because none of that exists. Like, it has to come from such a human place, because that's what people connect with, is a human place. So I am so happy to be extremely human for you guys whenever I can.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to humanize it myself too. Before I was preparing for the podcast and thinking about the things I would like to talk to you about today, in addition to any questions you may ask, I thought I really want to focus on limiting my ums and my likes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And straight out of the bat, for all you listeners, if you go to the very beginning, I said my ums.
I didn't even notice. I didn't even
said
notice.
it. I said it. And you know what? As I'm talking about it, my inner critic went, Maryam, you thought you could do this without an And then I quickly, I mean, it's become second nature for me now. I quickly recognized it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, actually, I hope there is a listener out there that's listening to this. And if you've ever wanted to be a guest on a podcast, let this be your example that you can do it, and you could still say an and a like. We're
Mm-hmm.
not all perfect, and perfection does not exist.
This is so true, because you're an incredible public speaker. Like, I've seen you lead workshops and be a public speaker. You're incredible at it. Like, be damned. Like, you're really good at getting in front of people. Like, that's such a home for you. And I'm so glad that, like, you're not going to let a few stop you from anything. And that the spirit behind this podcast, the reason this whole podcast even exists to begin with, is because I said to myself, like, I'm just going to record and post. I'm not going to spend a lot of time editing if I don't have to, right? Because there's software that will delete the ums. Like, there's software out there that will delete every in like 2 clicks, right? And I just, I don't want to do it. I said, I'm going to make this as simple as possible. Once I got my intro and outro nailed, I was like, I'm just going to hit record, and then I'm going to basically hit post and get it into the world. And you know what? I spend, like, once this is recorded, I spend maybe an hour a week doing what I need to do for this podcast. It makes it so doable. And that means it gets out there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be out there. Otherwise, I would drown in all of the to-dos of it, right? Sometimes you just got to get it out there and let some ums be there. Let it be there.
Perfection is the enemy of good.
It's true. It's true. I talk about this all the time. Like, nobody wants anything perfect to begin with. Like, that's so boring. It's so boring.
It's so boring.
Because it doesn't really exist. Like, our brains just know, like, perfection doesn't exist. This is not real.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's anything to underline right now, listeners, underline that.
Thank you. I love underlining things. I love to take a moment and, like, sit with a thing in a podcast.
And so let me just highlight what you're doing when you do that. We are in a world where we are constantly being pinged, whether it's an inbox, Instagram, text, DM, Slack, whatever it may be. We are constantly being ding, bing, come get this attention. Someone needs you here, right? What you're doing is you're slowing the learning so that we can really seep our teeth into it, as opposed to have it being an afterthought.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I like giving it a moment to absorb. So necessary.
We need that. We're
Right?
not robots.
Exactly. And I have missed absorption in my life, right? Like, I'm so, like, my brain really is getting to a point where I'm just scrolling too much, and the content is cool and it's fun. And then we move on to the next and the next and the next. But I miss absorption, right? I get to a point where I miss a long form article, and I remind myself, like, I need to read, let's sit for a minute with a long form article, or read, if I can read a book once a week, like, or read a book a week, that's my goal, right? Because that slows down my brain and increases my absorption rate, right? That's where I'm really getting the benefit of something. Yeah.
And if I could just tie it in,
yes,
100% bring back absorption. If I can just tie it in with the inner critic, when we move 1,000 miles a minute, the inner critics are so present without us knowing it. They are not only holding us by our ankles, they are holding us with our arms tied behind us. We don't even know that they're there. So that's another reason and another thing that I would like to tie in from what we were just talking about a couple
Mhm.
minutes ago. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So something's got to give. We have
Mhm.
to be able to look at ourselves with compassion and discernment to understand. Notice I didn't say judgment, I
Mhm.
said discernment,
Mhm.
so that we can ask ourselves, what is no longer serving me? What is keeping me from getting X, Y, Z in my life? That is where change begins. There is a deep yearning and a voice inside of us. And listen, change can be painful.
Mhm.
Notice I say can be. Sometimes it's not. Most times it can be. But nothing is more painful than doing the same thing over and over again and not getting the result you want or not
Yes.
being in a place that you don't belong. Nothing is more painful than that.
Yes. I do the way I resist change is is sometimes even to me quite impressive. I am just like, wow, I'm really putting up a fight here, aren't I? And for what? Like I will really panic over a brand new lighting setup that I'm like, I haven't done this before. Like I've got to panic rental a bunch of stuff. And the truth of it is if I just trust myself that I know how to do something new without having done this new thing before, but I know, like, I trust myself enough to figure it out and deliver. Like if I could just get out of my own way, if I could stop resisting it and go like, no, it's gonna be fine. No matter what, it's gonna be fine because it's always fine in the end. Yeah,
It will be okay. I had a mentor in graduate school that used to say to us, it will be okay. Just say that to yourself over and over again
Mhm.
until you actually believe it.
It will be okay. That's actually I had the most peaceful moment I've ever had in my life was it's like a summer. I was on a trip. I was in my 20s and I was on a beach and it was so long ago. I must have been like early 20s and I was living in anxiety day to day. And I didn't understand at the time that I was also living with severe depression. I did not know those things. And that's part of why I was on a trip. I was constantly trying to like escape my problems that aren't really escapable, right? Like the depression follows you on vacation, the anxiety followed me on vacation. And I was sitting on this beach and I was like laying down and it was such a clear moment. Like I was laying down on my stomach and it was like in the middle of the afternoon and the sun was just perfect and the temperature was just perfect and the waves were so lovely. And I had this huge feeling of peace just wash over me. And it was a feeling of like, it's all going to be okay. And I didn't know what it was talking about specifically because there was a lot of stuff I was worried about, but I didn't need to be worried about it. Um, but I just had this moment of like, no matter what, uh, for my whole life, everything is just going to be okay. And I come back to that moment as often as I can.
Okay, I want to highlight something here.
Okay.
Oftentimes, when we want to make a change in our life, as human beings, we're always thinking about what do I need to do next? What's the next thing I need to do? What's on my to-do list? Do, until we're like purple in the face. It's like we've got so many things we need to do.
Mhm.
What we oftentimes forget is that there is an energy that we need to cultivate within ourselves. There is this state of being, this energy that we
Mhm.
need to work on internally that sometimes, if not most times, is more important than the doing. And
Mhm.
what I hear from this example that you're telling me, and you got to tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but my intuition, what I hear when you shared that example with me was that there was an energy of relinquishing control and trust.
Mm. Yes, and what I wish I had known at that point, like that energy that kind of came over me and I was like everything's going to be okay. I wish I had been able to trust it more because I got up from that beach later and just went back to worrying because I didn't believe that kind of peace could be lasting or real or just a different state that I could exist in or something that I could come back to teach myself to come back to or teach my nervous system to come back to. I didn't realize that it took me years to learn that that could be my default state instead of something that like happened one time, right? And so what I wish I had done was trust that feeling over the feeling of like, but are we sure? Are we sure it's going to be okay? Because of all of this stuff. You know what I mean?
100, I totally understand what you mean.
Yeah.
And those were your inner critics.
Yes.
Sounds like there was a
Yes.
saboteur there, right?
Yes.
Keeping you from stepping into this energy of trust.
Yeah. And it took me years to understand that the inner critic, the primary inner critic in my brain wasn't even my voice. Didn't even took me a while to figure that out. Like who taught me to talk to myself like this is the
And
question.
so what I love that you're doing here is you're reflecting on where the birthplace of this came from.
Mm.
And once you come intimately aware of that, I would ask yourself, and with this newfound, understanding, what's possible for me when I say goodbye to that saboteur?
Yes.
What's on
Yeah.
the other side of this?
Right? Like, what if I just stopped believing the harshness of it? Like, what if I just asked myself, like, I observe the harshness and then I say, is that really true though?
What I want to know
Yeah.
what's possible for you as a result of saying, thank you so much, inner critic. I know you were here for me for a while to protect me, and it served me in some capacity. It no longer serves me. I'm so grateful for you for what you've done for me up until today. And I don't need you anymore. It's like, those
Mhm.
toys we had growing up.
Yeah.
I had this one sleepover Barbie that, with hot water, her eyes would shut, and with cold water, her eyes would open. And I thought it was a magic.
I had
Magic. Do you
that
remember
Barbie.
that?
Yes, I had that Barbie. It was incredible.
Incredible. And I
Loved.
loved her, and I would take her everywhere with me. And I got to a point in my life where she no longer served me.
Hmm.
But she did serve me for some period of my life. And I
Hmm.
think that's what we forget as society. We're like, oh, this inner critic, this saboteur, internal judge is so wrong. We end up judging the judger internally. And then
Yeah.
we wonder why we're in this shame spiral and we can't get out of it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's just so like once I started saying, okay, what's an alternative here? Find if this inner critic is going to speak. What if I speak next to it? Like an inner critic telling me like, don't apply to that exhibition. Nobody wants to see your work. Pairing that with like, well, what if they do? I mean, what's going to happen? They're going to say no. Okay. Like big deal, right? Like and also what if they say yes? And also because there is a reality where they say yes. Like everything, let's just say come from a position of what if everything is possible? What can I actually dream about here? What can I actually do? And it took me a while to get to an idea of what if everything is just simply possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. Again, this is why I love that you're humanizing this for all the listeners, because at the end of the day, no one is immune from this.
Mm-hmm.
We are all members of society together, and we're all co-contributing to it, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so not only are you making this change happen for yourself, but there's someone that's listening out there that's going to even they take 1% away from this, the ripple effect that it could create so that we can all
Mm.
collectively free ourselves and go after these big goals and dreams that we have.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that so much. Go for the big goals and dreams, you guys, because I think a lot of people think like they're not qualified or I couldn't do it. But sometimes I look at people who are winning their big goals and dreams, and I'm like, I think qualifications don't matter as much as I think that they do. Like, I think this is doable more than I think it is.
Okay, I actually put a little 30-second or a 60-second video on my Instagram grid about this. And this is it. There are people out there doing the things that you want to do, accomplishing the things you want to accomplish, only because they believe they can.
Yes. The truth of it. The truth of it. The truth of it.
100%.
If listeners, if you know me in real life, you know how I feel about Jeff Koons artwork, which is to say, like, I cannot stand Jeff Koons artwork. And as an artist, you're not supposed to have such like either it's for you or it's not for you, but you're not supposed to be like, oh, I can't stand that, right? Like in terms of like observing art and experiencing art, it's for you or it's not for you. And Jeff Koons artwork specifically is not for me. It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind because I'm like, I just get to a point where I'm like, look, if Jeff Koons can sell a metallic giant metallic animal balloon for tens of millions of dollars. And everybody goes, ooh, genius. I can submit my work to a gallery. It's fine. We're going to be fine, right?
I really do believe with people out there with half your experience
Mm-hmm.
and with a completely potential different perspective, right? One of my big values is perspective taking.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much that we can learn from one another. It could be about the same subject,
Mm-hmm.
but we come to it from different perspectives. And so the dialogue will be different even when we shift from one person to the next.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. I know people in my field who have completely different backgrounds and they believe in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're free from inner critics, but there is a belief system that they have that they can do this.
Yes.
And that in of itself is something that I'm gravitating towards. It's like a magnet for me. I'm like, tell me more.
Well, and I love the idea of like to make that easier for myself. I always go with like, well, let's just see. Like, let's just see what happens. Because why not? It cost me $0 to submit, or maybe it cost me $30 to submit. Who cares? Like, let's just see. Let's just see.
Sometimes it helps depending on the scenario. Folks, I don't want to say do this all the time, but depending on the scenario, sometimes it helps almost over catastrophizing something just to
Yeah,
almost say, well, that's the worst that could happen. Maybe it's not as bad as I thought.
exactly.
I don't recommend
Exactly.
doing that always.
But it helps, right? If the worst thing that can happen is somebody says no to me and I feel blah for a second about it. Okay, I will take that for the chance that somebody might say yes. Because I cannot emphasize this enough, you will be so pleasantly surprised by the people who say yes when you don't expect them to, because that will happen. If you look for the no's enough times, you're going to get a yes at some point. And I do love that. That's the
100%.
magic of everything. Um,
100%.
okay, can we talk about Enneagram?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm an Enneagram 1. What Enneagram are you?
4.
Okay, what is an Enneagram? Take us through. You're an
Hmm.
Enneagram expert. I've seen you speak and lead workshops about Enneagram. So can you tell us a little bit about what's Enneagram? Where give us the overall.
Yeah. So if you've heard of Myers-Briggs, you've heard of DISC, the Enneagram, like these other ones that I just mentioned, are different assessments for self growth learning and team development. Now, the difference between, in my perspective, the difference between the Enneagram and the other assessments is that most other assessments, I can't say all of them out there, nor can I say for certain about the ones I just mentioned, but most other assessments in comparison to the Enneagram, they will tell you about your characteristics and your personality. So imagine an iceberg in the ocean. They are giving us the data that's visible to the eye above the ocean water. The Enneagram takes you below the ocean water and it sheds light on your motivations, your fears, and your anxieties. Excuse me. And so, what I love about that is that when it helps us do this deeper awareness work, it puts us in choice.
Mm.
What I also love, so let me backtrack actually. Enneagram is a study of nine different ways of looking at things. That is the best way I can bottom line it. 9 numbers. Each number has a different name depending on which company you are certified with, but they all have similar descriptions. And it's 9 different ways of looking at things. As a 4, I'm part of this triad that is connected to the heart. So as a 4, I am motivated by being unique, really understanding my deep core feelings. Any 4s out there may resonate with this thought of it's very important for me to be unique, and I somehow will always think there's something innately wrong with me as a 4. And what I love about the Enneagram is that it doesn't just stop there and say, you were a 4.
Mhm.
It provides me, especially with the way that I coach and use it, it provides also the opportunity to understand what characteristics I take on under stress,
Mm.
what characteristics and how I show up when I'm on the healthy side of 4, whether the low side of 4.
Mhm.
I mentioned that the 4 is part of the triad about the heart and the feeling center. There's 2 other triads, and that is body and this relationship with anger. And the other one is through the head and the thought process, the way our ability to think. So it's thinking, feeling, or actually having like body movement action. And what I love about the Enneagram is that it doesn't just put me into this box, it helps me actually get myself out of the box I've put myself in
Mm.
unconsciously.
Wow. Okay, so if we're thinking about things like that, like what are we looking for in our Enneagram number that helps us get out of the box that we put ourselves in?
So I have a good friend of mine. She is a core type 2.
Mhm.
And some assessments call that the considerate helper. Now, she's motivated by meeting other people's needs. Have you ever been to the grocery store and there you overhear someone saying like, "Hey, where can I find the granola?" And that person just goes to the other aisle, brings the granola over for them, and they're like, "Here it is." Most
Yeah.
likely, I'd be willing to bet that person's a 2. They are there to help meet other people's needs.
Yeah.
And at times of stress, sometimes the
Mhm.
unhealthy side of 2, they can sometimes take on the characteristics of an 8. The 8 in some assessments is known as the active controller. They can be very direct, blunt, direct in your face. And sometimes under stress, this friend of mine who's a 2, she was very stressed out with work a few weeks ago, and she started just giving feedback left and right to some of her direct reports, and they were just flabbergasted. They were just, who is this person? Now, with this awareness, she's been able to take on the healthy things from an 8,
Mhm.
understand how to establish her own needs as well, because they are just as important as meeting other people's needs. So there are these different lines that I call the line of where you can stretch or release and grow from your side where you have stressful potential characteristics bubbling up to the surface. In this case, this person who went from a 2 to an 8. There's also 2 to a 4. Each number has its own line relationships.
Mhm.
And then in addition to that, we also have something called wings. So the wings for a 2 are a 1 and a 3.
Mhm.
These are the ways that you can help potentially harness energy from your wing numbers, in this case, the 1 and a 3, in a manner to help you expand your range so
Mhm.
that you're not just stuck in this cycle of the 2 energy, the 2 behaviors and characteristics. The 3s are exceptionally effective at getting things done. And I always want to have a 3 on my team. I'm like, oh my goodness, you all can get it done. And so when a 2 is really struggling to get things done, I encourage we talk a little bit
Mm.
about what is the energy, what are the things that you can bring in from a 3 because it's closer to you. It's one of your wings.
Mhm.
And same goes for if they want to harness the perfectionist of a 1. Where can we have laser detail on things that really do need detail orientation too, that you can leverage from this 1?
Mm. I do love a detail, maybe a little too much.
So I think really to bottom line this, it's 9 different ways of looking at things. There are things such as wings and lines and different ways to help you get out of this box, quote unquote, that you've put yourself in.
Mhm.
It's a tool, it's a language, it's a resource to help you get more intimately aware with yourself, with your motivations, with your anxieties and your fears, so that you can start anew, so that you can curb those inner critics, so that you can go towards these goals and not have them be these dreams far in the distance.
Mhm.
So it's just one tool that I use. I absolutely love it because it doesn't box you in, like I shared earlier. It
Mhm.
helps unbox you, it liberates you. And what I really do appreciate about it too is that it showcases the complexities of being a human being. I'm a big believer that we have all 9 within us.
Mm-hmm.
We just have one that's a preferred core type.
Mm-hmm.
And there are days, depending on, the context of the day, as a 4, I very well may be wanting to get home as fast as I can and preserve my energy and really channel that 5.
Okay. So this is something I wonder about is like, I took my Enneagram 6 years ago, like a long time ago. Does your Enneagram ever change over time? If you're focused even on if you're focused on self-development stuff, can you ever see your Enneagram evolve with it?
So this is the $1,000,000 question. Now, depending on who you ask, people have different perspectives on this.
Mhm.
My perspective is that most times it does not change.
Mhm.
However, context matters. We have this inside joke amongst my graduate school friends. We always say the quote, "It depends," because it truly does depend. If you're taking the assessment, as much as we practitioners, Enneagram practitioners, coach our clients to take this assessment with a objective point of view, not think about just work or just at home, think about this holistically. We're human beings. We can't remove the lens from our eyeballs, right? We
Mhm.
can't remove memory from our brains and completely erase it like a Men in Black clip, right? With like a little flashlight. So it really just depends. So if you're taking the assessment in a time in your life where you're incredibly stressed out, you may end up like, for this friend of mine who was a 2, if she took this when she was incredibly stressed out,
Mhm.
she may have gotten a report that she was an 8.
Oh,
I
interesting.
I truly don't know. Now, that doesn't always happen, and there are probably Enneagram practitioners listening to this right now saying, "No, Maryam, that's not right." And you know what? It really just depends. But most times the assessment is made in a way where it would be able to decipher past and through those things.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to say it's not possible. It absolutely is possible. And it just depends. Sometimes I don't even think that people should take the assessment. I think people should read and learn all about 9 different types and then just
Oh,
see what resonates with them.
I love that. I love that.
And, and be honest with yourself because when you're not, you end up doing the work of something that may not be resonant for you.
Mm.
And most times when people get their number report from me, they resist it. And wait a second, this is not me at all. I'm like, let me circle back on this after 3 more coaching sessions.
Okay, so that's actually when I first did my Enneagram test, I got a 1 and I was like, "Are we sure?" I mean, like, yeah, but really? And I did take it at a time of like very much burnout. And so now I feel like I'm gonna go back and take it again and see what happens.
And you know what? You may still end up getting a 1. I want you
Yeah.
to have that opportunity to remember that it may still be a 1. I ended up getting certified through a program that I have a lot of admiration and respect for because their questions are rooted in a way
Mhm.
to help get through those unconscious motivations.
Mhm.
And I resisted. I mean, I will say I resisted my type and I have been mistyped. I was a
Oh.
2 at one point,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I resisted it and I was so dead set that I wasn't a 2 because previously when I took it, I was a 4. I'm like, there's no way. Like, oh, I took this because I was really stressed out in this environment. That's okay. So I'm going to take it again.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I didn't even need to take it again. When I started doing the work, quote unquote, the
Mhm.
work, I knew that there was a lot of work ahead of me as a
Mhm.
4. Whereas some of the things with the 2, I wasn't really resonating with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny because uh, so when I got the 1 and it was a wing 2, I didn't fully understand the wing system, but I saw wing 2 and I was like really resistant to being even a wing 2. I was like, "Ugh, yeah, right." And if I'm being honest with myself, yeah, I'm a wing 2, but yeah, the resistance to it, I was surprised at. That's so funny.
And I don't, again, you're beautifully humanizing this for every listener. It's okay to not like the core type
Mm.
if we listen to it with a curiosity with the intent to understand versus the intent to react, I'm willing to bet there's something in it that's going to have resonance where it could be deeply explored with you and your coach.
Interesting. I love that. I love that. Okay, I have one more question for you. I have my sliding doors question, which is my favorite question of everything. But before we do that, tell us how people can learn more about you, get in touch with you. What have you got coming up? Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So this inner critic guide that I keep speaking of, it is a free downloadable guide for all the listeners out there. Anyone who visits my website, you just need to put in your name and email and it's in your inbox. It's a 4-step guide to help you challenge and handle these pesky inner critics. And so you can get that guide by visiting my website, which is marzaraco.com, marzaraco.com/4 steps. So the number 4 and steps plural. And also, with everybody else out there, you can always find me on Instagram at Marzara And I often put up a lot of tips and little fun tricks on how to be able not only to curb the inner critic, but help you unlock your sound, resonant leader within.
Ooh, I love that. And all of those links will be in the show notes. So y'all get to clicking, easy clicking. Okay, so tell me about Sliding Doors Moment for any new listeners. Sliding Doors is just a movie from the late 90s. And in it, one small thing happens to a woman going home from work and it splits her life timeline in two. And we see what happens when one thing happens and then what happens when another thing happens. And the point is like one small thing makes a major difference in her entire life. And so that's my question is like, what is one small thing that just seemed so insignificant at the time that has made a huge difference in your life?
Believing in myself.
Mm.
That is the way to bottom line it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to double click into it, I wasn't truly happy and resonant with the work that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to spend a lot of time thinking back and reflecting to where in my life I felt the most lit up, energized, and passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did that, I realized there was a myriad of things. Whether I was in undergraduate school lobbying in Sacramento for the 36,000 students of my alma mater where I got my bachelor's degree,
Mm-hmm.
whether I was helping an organization and their team work more effectively together, those were my moments where I thought I was lit up, I was passionate, I was honoring my values, and I had to have a wake-up call and realize I'm not happy doing this transactional work. I want to do transformational change, and I want to help people be the best version of themselves. And that moment was when I realized I was playing small. It's
Mm.
the moment where I realized I was transforming. So how can I help transform others and help them be the best versions of themselves? So I kind of cheat with your question. There's not one, there's many. But it all started because I had to sit and actually listen to my mind, my heart, and to my body.
Mm. I love that because that does make it can be a moment, an inner moment that just changes everything, which sounds so simple, but is so big. And I love that.
I like to say that sometimes the hardest things in life have the most simplest
Mm.
responses,
Yeah.
have the most simple answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most simple questions have the most complex answers.
Yes. I have spent so much time unfolding this in myself because the idea that sometimes hard things can have simple answers has always felt so counterintuitive. So letting things be easy, simply saying to myself, I let it be easy. What's the easy solution because I believe it can be easy has been magical, wildly magical. The way things have shifted in my whole life just from going, I let it be easy. Wild.
You relinquish control. I think
Mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing you say is that something wasn't yielding what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Again, nothing changes if nothing changes. So what's the alternative here? The
Mm-hmm.
alternative is just potentially letting it be easy.
Yes. Yes. And you're right, you're
Because
exactly
making it
right.
complicated,
Yeah,
because making it complicated didn't serve you. It wasn't
exactly.
getting you what you wanted. You were more, I'll speak on behalf of myself. I wasn't happy at work. I wasn't happy at home. My health was declining. You know, I'm like, wait a second. Where is this all pointing me to?
Mhm.
I'm not happy. And I want to be happy. And when I'm happy is when I'm serving people and
Mhm.
helping them live the most magical life they've ever wanted to, whether it's at work or at home.
Yes. Yes. And I noticed for myself, like exactly what you're talking about, the relinquishing the surrendering of it, because saying I let it be easy is me saying I'm going to let go control of this, right? I'm looking for a specific outcome. It's not happening. And the more I try to control it, the more difficult it gets, the more frustrating it gets, and the less anything is happening. So I'm going to take my hands off the wheel. I don't mean to quote like who's the singer? Um, I don't even remember. I'm gonna let the car drive it. I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let it be easy. Um, and that just saying, you know what if I just say yes to this thing? There are so many things that can come up in a project or a contract negotiation, or I think what I was saying earlier before our call, where it used to be I just sold a specific package over and over again in my photography business, and I loved it. I loved that way of doing business, but that's what has shifted for me so dramatically into 2024. What my clients need from me is not that package anymore. They need something custom, and they need something different. And letting go control of trying to fit new clients into these old boxes has been so hard, because I have a system with that old package and everything's clear cut, right? And so it comes down to like, I need to be willing to let go control and saying, I can make something custom for everybody. And I'm happy to, that actually makes, and it has made things easier. It has made things better. And so that has been a wild change. So yes, like it's the letting go control. It's the taking a breath and going, I trust that this in front of me is what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm not supposed to be controlling every little detail. And it has made things wildly better and more fun and easier and better
Yeah.
paid.
I will give you an example. There is an executive that I coach right now, and they were in one of our sessions, just got back from vacation. And he was telling me that while he was on vacation, he made the mistake of looking at his inbox. And there was an email that someone had sent him asking for something and had copied his team on it. And he told me he was so frustrated
Mm-hmm.
when he checked the email and that no one had responded. He just felt that he played this role that if he's not there and on at all times, things don't get done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so he immediately broke his promise to me of not working while on vacation
Mm-hmm.
for his daughter's graduation trip. And what I love about the way that I work with my clients is that I want to hear when they break my promises because it humanizes it, where no one's perfect, where, rules will get broken here and there. And that's where the learning is. That's where the aha moment is.
Mm-hmm.
Without getting into details, because I will never get into details or breach any sort of confidentiality. So without getting into the weeds like that, I will share that the biggest learning for him the next time he went on a trip was when I said to him, what if you didn't respond?
Mm-hmm.
Just see what would happen. And he didn't. He came back from that other vacation that he had just taken with his wife. Sans kids, he always says to me, without kids. He decided to not respond, and
Mm-hmm.
people stepped up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it's not so much of the doing
Mm-hmm.
as it is the not doing.
That's it. That's the thing that's so hard to let go control of, is saying this will get done if I don't do it. And it's such a wild feeling, but it works. It fully works wildly.
I mean, I know listeners can't see me, but I'm nodding my head because it does. Transformation most times is not about learning something new. It's about
Mhm.
unlearning something,
Yes.
unlearning a limiting belief of yourself, a perspective that you're in that no longer serves you,
Mhm.
unlearning the thought process that you have to be everywhere and be everything to everyone,
Mhm. Mhm.
and letting
Exactly.
go of that.
Exactly. And the first time I had a suspicion that this might be the way to do things was many years ago. So this must have been 6, 5 or 6 years ago. And I won't do specifics either, but I will say I just got an email that was upsetting, that it seemed to me, in order to get things into a good place, I felt like I needed to respond immediately and take care of a bunch of things. And instead of doing that, I said to myself, I'm actually going to give this 24 hours before I respond to see if something changes, to see if I get another email that fixes ultimately essentially what was going on. Someone had been unkind in their email to me, and I was like, I'm going to give them 24 hours to be kind here. Right. And it worked. Like, I woke up the next morning with an email that was like, you know what? Right. And it was wild to just say, let's give it a minute. And the more times I find myself giving things a minute, and it's not always like a bad situation, but sometimes it's just, is this really urgent? Can I give it a minute? And maybe the situation will fix itself. Wow. That has been a wild change and so amazing.
This takes us back towards the beginning of this call, the power in slowing down.
Mm,
Go slow to go fast. The
yes.
power in that, the ability to not go at lightning speed because all our devices do.
Mm-hmm.
We're not
Mm-hmm.
devices. We're human beings with a beating
Yes.
heart.
Yes. Something I do specifically in my business is I do push all forms, most, like, for the majority of things, I push most people into email communication. I don't typically do text messages unless I have like a knowing or a trust with somebody. But the reason is because I am so terrible at returning text messages. My family will wait for days for me to return a text message. And my friends, I can't tell you how much I love my friends so much, because it'll be a week, it'll be 2 weeks. And I'm so bad at that. And I had someone one time was like, I hadn't responded for 5 minutes. And this wasn't a client. This was just someone in my life. And I hadn't responded for 5 minutes. And they were like, why aren't you responding? Like, can you blah, blah, blah. And I looked at my phone. And I was like, that's not how I run my life. I do not sit by my phone forever a day. I don't feel the urgency to respond to a text message immediately. Unless it's a client texting me, then I'm like, yes, I need to get on top of this. But I'm just so not into everything I have to be on my phone responding to everything immediately, because I remember being in high school and somebody would call you, and maybe they leave a message on your answering machine, and maybe you call back a day later. Like, that used to be a normal pace of conversation, and that was fine. And so when we get to today and it's like, I have to return a text message in 5 minutes, I just think to myself, no, I don't. Like, just because that's the way it's done now doesn't mean I'm ever going to do it that way.
Okay, I know your listeners can't see me, but the amount of times I was nodding my head as you were just saying what you were saying, I mean, I think that my head is still bopping like one of those toy, I don't know, those dolls that you see. What I want to highlight here, because I think this concept of not being available 24/7, some of the listeners are like, yeah, no duh, Paige and Maryam. Yeah, we are past that. But why is it important? This is what I really want to highlight
Mhm.
here. Why is that important? Because by you saying no to being available at everyone's beck and call,
Mhm.
you are now actually saying yes to you and what's important to you.
Mhm.
That is something I want to highlight. When you are
Yeah,
available to everyone 24/7, then what are you actually prioritizing is my question.
exactly.
You
Exactly.
cannot be everything to every person at every minute of the day. Because
Yes.
then what I would actually wonder, my curiosity would go is, where is your relationship with yourself?
Yes. Exactly.
There is some worthiness there to explore that I would be curious about.
Oh, exactly. My journey to not feeling like I have to respond to every text message immediately parallels my journey with calming my nervous system, my self-esteem, my worthiness, and my comfort level in terms of like, because it used to be like for a period, I felt like I did have to match a pace of conversation of like responding immediately because my worry was, my friends and family are going to stop loving me and stop contacting me at all if I don't respond immediately. And I just got to a place where I went, let's test this theory because I don't want to respond immediately. If I wait a day, do people immediately cut ties with me? No, they don't. And I want to be fair in this. Like sometimes I wait too long. Like my friends deserve for me to respond sooner. My family deserves for me to respond sooner in some cases. And I am so grateful that they give me grace here. But it has really taught me over time that nobody's going to make such a harsh decision about me simply because I decide that I need some time on something.
And if they did make a harsh decision about you, that is data for you to use to determine if you want to invite and keep that energy in your life.
Exactly. Exactly.
The choice, I mean, there is choice, folks. There's the element of choice. Oftentimes we think we don't have choices in some things. Okay, let's be real. We don't have choices about everything in our lives. We
Mm-hmm.
get handed a deck of cards or, five cards in a deck of life, and we have to make the best foot forward.
Mm-hmm.
But even in those 5 cards that you were given, there is choice there.
Exactly.
And are we
Exactly.
making it consciously or just are we on autopilot?
Mm-hmm. And
And
the
I
times, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 no. I was just going to say, and please, no apologies needed. What I was just going to say is that I think there have been times in my life where I have been on autopilot, where I remember what I was just saying, part of the question that you had asked. What was that one moment that shifted everything for me? There were times in my life where I was on autopilot and I just realized, I'm like, wait a second, there's something not resonant here for me that
Mm-hmm.
I'm unhappy with. So I need to take a look at the cards in my hand again and ask myself, which card do I want to place now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I relate it to this concept of always being on and available at all times. I can't, I'll use myself as an example right now. I can't get to the next stage of my life if I continue doing the same things I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that again because this applies to everyone. You cannot, listener, get to the next stage of your life if you are doing the same things you are doing today. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Even if it's something that changes by 1%, it will help you get on that path.
And it's wild how much that 1% oh, it's incredible.
So then it begs the question of what is that 1%, one thing, one small change that if you were to be successful at it would completely transform your life?
Mm-hmm.
Go do it.
Heck yes. That's where I think is the perfect like pinned point this whole conversation. This was such an incredible episode. Maryam, thank you so much. Like you're an amazing guest and an amazing speaker and I'm just so grateful to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having this podcast. Thank you for allowing me to be a guest. And just thank you for being this wonderful ray of positive energy. We're all better for knowing you. And I'm really grateful. Thank
Oh my
you.
gosh, thank you. Everybody go check out the show notes, do some clicking. You will be so happy you did.